I remember like getting out the plane, surrounded by snow and mountains, turning on your phones and just all these messages from friends in Kharkiv saying they're bombing us with warplanes, they're dropping bombs on us. I wasn't going to sit on the border forever. Like realistically, I was going to go to cover the war, but I didn't like rush to the front lines. I stayed in the cities for the first trip. But then, as you know, like the cities are front lines as well because Russia attacks everything with impunity. Putin, to stay in power, he had sort of riling people up to hate the Chechens. That worked well for a while. Then it was hating the gays. That did well. And then what else do we have to sort of feel impassioned about? Oh, World War II. Really, that's... So the sort of...
Our latest guest in the Dartington Library is Jen Stout, who's been talking at the Byline Festival about her book, Night Train to Odessa. And Jen, this is one woman's story of heading into trouble, looking for some kind of experience as a war reporter. It starts with you, though, actually in Russia itself at the start of the invasion of Ukraine. How did that come about?
I moved to Moscow in November 21. So I was working at the BBC. I left, the only stable, permanent job in journalism. I left Shetland and I went to Moscow. I'd been trying to do that for like 15 years, since I left school. But it's really difficult to just go when you don't really have any money. So got on this fully funded fellowship, and we were in Moscow for about 3.5 months studying Russian. I was going to do an internship as a journalist in some form. But already these things were becoming really difficult, to be a reporter in Russia. I was quite paranoid. And the invasion, the 24th of February, we'd gone on a programme trip, which was unfortunately timed. I didn't really think we should go to the very heart of Siberia, the heart of the continent, to Gorno-Altaysk. And we had sort of 4 days there, and it was the morning, and we got off the plane sort of 9 a.m. It was an overnight flight from Moscow because it's so far, right? And I remember like getting out the plane, surrounded by snow and mountains, turning on your phones and just all these messages from friends in Kharkiv saying they're bombing us with warplanes, they're dropping bombs on us. And if you remember, a lot of people didn't think it was going to happen. In retrospect, what the hell did we think they were doing with hundreds of thousands of troops massed on the border? But there was that whole thing of like, the Western intelligence agencies are just stirring things up. No, they were absolutely correct, So yeah, just standing there kind of frozen to the spot and thinking, we need to leave, we need to leave the country, need to leave Moscow. And it took a few days, and then the fellowship was abruptly ended. And I got to Vienna on the 28th February, 1st of March. It's a bit of a blur. And spent a few days there thinking, where am I going to go? I didn't want to go home, And so I went to Izatia on the border, where the Danube forms the border, so southeast Romania, and reported on the refugees there and spent a few weeks deciding what to do next, which ended up being Odessa.
You could have come home at that point, couldn't you? You could have come back to the UK. You could have gone almost anywhere in the world that you chose to, or at least where your passport would take you. And you chose to head to trouble in Odessa after the full-scale invasion. Mm-hmm. What do you think pushed you in that direction?
I'd been to Ukraine before. I really, really liked it. I'd been to Kharkiv a few years before. I had friends there and friends in Kiev. I wanted to be in the thick of things. And I kind of struggled with the decision. You don't want to be selfish and you don't want to... a lot of people thought it was very selfish and reckless and I shouldn't be doing it. Didn't have enough experience. But how does one get the experience without doing the thing? I would like to know. So, I didn't kind of rush in. I was in Romania for a few weeks. I managed to get on a kind of 2-day sort of a training course, hostile environment course at the Frontline Club in London. So I came back for that. And... I was trying to find a flak jacket and these things. I wasn't realistically... I speak Russian. I know a lot about the region. I've studied it for a long time. I had friends all over Ukraine, and I had this feeling that it was exactly where I should be. I wasn't going to sit on the border forever. Like, realistically, I was going to go to cover the war, but I didn't rush to the front lines. I stayed in the cities for the first trip. But then, as you know, the cities are front lines as well because Russia attacks everything with impunity. So, yeah, it was mid-April, early April when I got to Odessa.
But you also had a feeling for Russia. As a student in Shetland, you had studied Russian at GCSE. You tried...
Intermediate level, the Scottish system. We don't have GCSEs.
Yeah, okay. Forgive my ignorance. And you had taken up this scholarship to Russia. So there was some kind of affinity with that country as well. What was it about Russia that appealed to you?
Well, the language first is what grabbed me. I mean, I loved the language. I was sort of 16 or 15 when I started learning it, and I wasn't very good at attending school, and I wasn't really into the whole thing for some good reasons. And I didn't really like French because I thought it was a bit illogical. Do you know, I was a bit of a bolshy teenager. And it was a combination of a language that I genuinely feel like I'd spoken it in a past life. I just knew it already. It was very strange. And a teacher, like a good teacher, who gave a fig and listened and encouraged me, you know, which is what you need when you're an angry teenager in your Nirvana hoodie with a lot of stuff going on at home. You need someone who encourages you and believes in you. And she did. And it just makes such a difference to your whole life, you know?
Yeah. And in the UK, I'd say prior to Putin, people would have said, you know, there's much to admire about Russia in terms of its literature. Russia sacrificed more troops in World War II than any other nation. But since Putin's ascent to power, it has been an aggressive militaristic state. The invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was a full-scale invasion, but of course there had been incursions prior to that.
It's been a whole war
to Ukraine.
Yeah.
But I mean, were you concerned about that? Well, you
Yeah,
must
of
have looked
course.
at that and thought, well, what is this Russia that I'm going to?
Absolutely. I was well aware that I was way too late. As ever, I was 15 years too late. I was 15 years too late for the sort of heyday of newspapers that I would have loved to be in, the sort of Sunday Herald era in Scottish journalism. That's all dead. All the newspapers hardly have any budget for foreign stuff at all. I was too late for the kind of interesting times of, like, you know, the early bits of democracy in Russia. And yeah, I mean, when I got there, I was under no illusions as to what kind of country it was. And certainly, you know, there were topics that you would avoid with people like my teachers because you want to get on with them. Maybe that was cowardly. Certainly things like Crimea, what one of my teachers referred to as those so-called LGBTs of whom we have none, that sort of stuff.
In all seriousness.
Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. Look, because that's the kind of, I mean, Putin, to stay in power, he had sort of riling people up to hate the Chechens. That worked well for a while. Then it was hating the gays. That did well. And then, like, well, what else do we have to sort of feel impassioned about? Oh, World War II. I mean, really, that's... So the sort of the dramatic myth of the greatness of Russia and all bound up in kind of Soviet greatness and World War II and that sort of creeping Stalinism coming back, glorification of Stalin. I mean, all this has been on show for a long time and I wasn't under any illusions about it. So, I mean, yeah, I was happy to leave. It wasn't like I was, oh no, please let me stay in delightful Moscow.
But you had wanted to be a war correspondent from many years earlier. You were inspired, I think, by Mary Colvin. Is that right?
Yeah, and Martha Gellhorn, Virginia Coles, John Steinbeck. I love his, you know, the kind of writing, it's not so much about the millimetre measurement of the shell, but about what's it like, you know. Well, I mean, if you write about human beings, there's nowhere sharper, where everything is more pronounced and everything extraneous is kind of stripped back and you get the best and the worst behaviour, often the best, I've found. And to be in this society, right, if I'm interested in sociology, that's what I studied at university, and to, like, the ideas of identity, who do people think they are, and the narratives that we all have about ourselves, how does that change, what's driving it, what understanding or twisting of history, which this war is based on, I mean, Putin's version of Russian-Ukrainian history. So to be in the middle of all of that, you know, like watching it happen live, I mean, what, isn't that, who wouldn't want to? Well, I mean, certainly I felt very lucky to be there and to be learning about all this.
I think most people would be quite happy to experience it at a remove, reading your kind of articles rather than experiencing it for themselves. But just give me a sense then of what it's like being in Odessa, being in these cities when they're under attack.
It's very surreal because there's so much normality. It's like 90% normal, oh God, oh, normal, you know. I'm not being flippant, it's the only way to explain it. And I do actually find it really difficult. You know, when I'd be in Kiev, I remember when they started the strikes on sort of 11th of October, 22. And I'd said on the radio, I was doing a live, and I said, you know, this missile hit the rush hour, hit a busy junction. And I remember the presenter being really sort of taken aback. He said, what do you mean rush hour? Because of course, like, And it's not because the media are giving you a certain version. It's just that, normal life continues is not a headline. Rocket kills 8 in European city is a headline.